ITUAN and the king's wife. Once upon a time, there lived a young man of Calabar named ITUAN. He was the only child of his parents. They were extremely fond of him. ITUAN was a very handsome young man of fine proportions and height. His parents were poor people, and when ITUAN grew up and became a man, he had very little money to take care of himself and his parents. In fact, they had so little food, that every day ITUAN had the custom of going to the market carrying an empty bag, into which he would put any eatable thing he could find after the market had closed. At that time, Ophiong was the king of ITUAN's village. King Ophiong was an old man, who had plenty of wives. One of his wives was named Item. Item was quite young and very good looking. She did not like her husband because he was old. She wished for a far younger and handsome husband. One day, she told her servant to go round the village and into the marketplace to see if she could find such a man that met her specification and bring that man to her at night. Her servant on getting such a man was to sneak him into the palace and come with him to the side of her door to her house without being caught or seen by the palace guards or anyone, and then she would let him into her room. She devised a plan in a way that her husband would not discover the foreign visitors. On the said day, the servant went all round the village, but failed to find any young man that was good looking enough for her. The servant was returning to report her ill success to the queen when, on passing through the marketplace, she saw ITUAN picking up the remains of corn and other things which had been left in the ground. She was immediately struck with his fine appearance and strength, and saw that he was just the kind of man that would make a proper lover for her mistress, so she went up to him, and told him that the queen had sent for him, as she was so taken by his good looks. At first ITUAN was frightened and refused to go, as he knew that if the king discovered what the queen's servant was asking of him, he would be killed. However, after much persuasion he consented, and agreed to go to the queen's apartment when it was dark. When night came he went with great fear and trembling, and knocked very softly at the queen's door. The door was opened at once by the queen herself. To entice ITUAN, the queen was dressed in one of her best clothes, having on many necklaces, beads, and anklets. Immediately, she saw ITUAN, she fell in love with him at once, praising his good looks and his shapely limbs. She then told her servant to bring water and clothes for him, and after he had had a good wash and put on a clean cloth, he rejoined the queen where she was sitting. The queen hid him in her house all night. In the morning when he wished to go she would not let him. Although it was very dangerous, she hid him in the house, and secretly conveyed food and clothes to him. After ITUAN had stayed in the queen's apartment for 2 weeks, he said to the queen, "My queen, please, it's time for me to go and see my mother." But the queen persuaded him to stay another week, much against ITUAN's will. When the time came for him to depart, the queen got together 50 bags full with presents for ITUAN's mother, who she knew was a very poor woman. 10 slaves carried 300 rods, the other 40 carried yams, pepper, salt, tobacco, and cloth. When all the presents arrived at ITUAN's mother's house, she was very pleased and she embraced her son, noticing with pleasure that he was looking well, and was dressed in much finer clothes than usual. When she heard that ITUAN had attracted the queen's attention, she became frightened, as she knew the penalty imposed on any one who attracted the attention of one of the king's wives. ITUAN stayed for a month in his parents' house and worked on their farm. As time passed, as the queen could not stay any longer than she had already stayed without her lover, she sent for ITUAN to come to her at once. ITUAN once again went, and, as before, arrived at night. The queen was delighted to see him again. In the middle of the night some of the king's servants, who had been told the story of what was going on by the queen's slaves, who had helped to carry the presents to ITUAN's mother place, came into the queen's room surprising her and ITUAN. Their hidden lover affair has come to the open. They hastened to the king, and told him what they had seen. ITUAN was arrested and made a prisoner. The king then sent out a message to all his people to come to the palace house to hear the case being tried. He also ordered 8 Egbos to attend, armed with machetes, cane and weapons. When the case was tried, ITUAN was found guilty, and the king told the 8 Egbo men to take him into the bush and deal with him according to native custom. The Egbos then took ITUAN into the bush and tied him up to a tree. Then with a sharp knife they cut off his lower jaw, and carried it to the king. When the queen heard the fate of her lover she was very sad, and cried for 3 days. This made the king very angry that he told the Egbos to deal with his wife and her servant according to their law. They took the queen and the servant into the bush, where ITUAN was still tied up to the tree dying and in great pain. As the queen had nothing to say in her defense, they tied her and the girl who had helped carry out the plan up to different trees. The queen's lower jaw was cut off in the same way as they had done to her lover. The Egbos then plucked out both eyes of the servant, and then left all 3 to die of Starvation. The king then made an Egbo law for the future purpose, that from that day onwards, no one belonging to ITUAN's family was to go into the market on market days, and no one was to pick up any leftover rubbish in the marketplace. The king made an exception to the law in favor of the vultures and the dogs, who were not considered very fine creatures, and would not be likely to run off with one of the king's wives. That is why, most times, you find vultures and dogs being scavengers in the marketplaces even till this day.